Welcome back. You're watching SABC News. Social media company Twitter's board has accepted a buyout deal from South African-born American entrepreneur Elon Musk after initially seeking to fend off a hostile takeover. After growing expectations that a deal was on the offing, Twitter has agreed to sell and go private in an agreement estimated at around $44 billion. Indications are that influential social media company would be revamped or overhauled under Musk's leadership, including changes on how it moderates content. Twitter agreed to pay a deal of $54.2 per share, a premium over what the price was before Musk's involvement in the company became public knowledge. Twitter chairperson Brett Taylor said in a statement that the board had conducted a thoughtful and comprehensive process to assess Musk's proposal with a deliberate focus on value, certainty and financing. The Pretoria-born entrepreneur earlier tweeted that he hoped that even his worst critics would remain on Twitter because that's what free speech means. Well, for some analysis, we're now joined by the CEO of the Daily Maverick, Styli Charalambous. Styli, thank you so much for joining us. Was Twitter in trouble?
Well, Twitter, relative to its other social media peers, had been underperforming as a company, generating less revenue and less revenue per active user. It's also its daily active users compared to the likes of Facebook and other social media platforms or big tech platforms had been underperforming, and even on the ad revenue side was generating less revenue than even an unexpected competitor like Amazon. Not to mention the big guys in the field, Google and Facebook, or Meta and Alphabet, as their parent companies are known. So yes, Twitter had been underperforming. Their founding CEO had left due to shareholder pressure. And I guess maybe this is one of the reasons why the board and the shareholders are looking for some new people or new person to take over.
Do we know why it was underperforming? Is it poor management or is it the nature of the beast? Because Twitter is nothing like the others. I mean, it really is an animal all by itself.
It is. It's very difficult. It had pursued an ad-supported model for since its early days, and there was talk of perhaps maybe it would have been more successful, more profitable had it employed a subscription for large users or large or users with large fan bases and corporates with large accounts. So there was some talk of whether that model would fix it from a business perspective. But Elon Musk obviously has some other ideas about what he could do to improve the service. He's talked about making the algorithm open source so that people would have more trust in the platform. He would also look at the content moderation policies of Twitter that has in recent times got rid of people like President Trump, who was expelled for inciting violence through the January riots on the Capitol. So there are a couple of big changes that he's made, overtures that he would make once, if the deal was successful, which we now know is successful, and whether that will improve the economic performance of the platform is something that we'll have to wait and see.
Okay, I am curious what he can possibly do differently, and it sounds almost as if we've got somebody who wants to do the right thing for society more than it is about trying to make billions more dollars.
Well, I'm not sure whether it will be the right thing for society. He's talking about the content moderation policies of Twitter being too strict. When Twitter itself actually has a serious mis and disinformation problem. It is filled with bots, automated bots that are trained and programmed to attack targets that have been chosen. the amount of lies and untruths and mis and disinformation campaigns that are started and accelerated on Twitter is a huge, huge problem. So I'm not sure that the content moderation policies are too strict. If anything, there's a serious lack of accountability for the kind of trash that gets spewed on the platform.
The thing about these kinds of social media platforms is that they're only as good as until the next one comes along. And so you invest 44 billion. That's a bet that this thing's going to be around for a little while longer. What's your thoughts based on what you've seen in the past and also the proliferation of social media platforms in different formats, whether it's Insta, TikTok, you name it? There's just something out there.
Yeah, every company really has to think about what's the next thing. How do they outpace change? How do they keep up with new innovations, new product features, ways to stay relevant? And, every business has to deal with that. Every business has to contend with that. But technology, social media platforms, even more so, because as quickly as the one can rise, the next competitor there that's overtaken them. If we look at how quickly TikTok has become such a sensation in the social media space, and they won't be the last. So this is a big bet on the future of Twitter. But this is the world's richest man as well, who's selling a big chunk of his stake in order to finance this deal as well. So he's got a bit of change to play with. It's obviously quite important to him. This phenomenon of billionaires taking ownership stakes in media companies, or in this case, a social media company, is nothing really new. I mean, we've seen Jeff Bezos, who was formerly the richest man in the world, buying the Washington Post, a legacy operation, but still in the media space. And in some cases, there's always been this link between really rich and powerful people and their desire, perhaps from an ego-driven perspective, to be part of the news or to be in some way part of controlling the news. And I guess that's the big risk that people are worried about here. How much is Musk going to change the platform to suit his interests, to suit his investments, and perhaps to, drown out people who he doesn't agree with or who he doesn't like? And so all of those are big questions that everyone's waiting to see how that unfolds in the weeks and months to come as the deal is signed and the deal is concluded. It obviously takes time for all this stuff to settle before the changes are actually evident for us to see.
Is it possible to bend it to your will? I mean, I'm on Twitter. I'm not going to put up with anyone changing the way I'm experiencing it. Mm-hmm. I'm sure there'll be a lot of resistance. I mean, can you, or am I being shaped and I don't even realize it?
Mm-hmm. Well, that is one of the biggest issues with social media and the power that the people who control the algorithms have. We've seen in this country alone the impact of social media algorithms and how they were able to be manipulated to influence public narrative. We've seen how Facebook and other platforms too were used to influence the outcome of the Brexit election and the 2016 US presidential elections. And that's because algorithms can be manipulated with a bit of spending power behind it. They can be manipulated to extrapolate messages and put them in front of people whose perceptions of certain events or certain people can be massaged into into believing something that may not be true. And that is actually something that Musk has said he wants to provide clarity on. He wants to help people understand how some tweets are promoted and some tweets are demoted, but ultimately that doesn't change the fact that those algorithms are at the disposal of the owners or of the engineers who control that, and who can lead to largely disruptive and potentially negative outcomes.
I know that the sellers are saying that after great thought and careful consideration, but it sounds almost like their hand was forced in the end.
Yeah, well, it is an underperforming asset. It has been a perennial underperformer on its share price, on all its key metrics. And so if someone comes in and offers, I think it was close to a 40% premium on the listed share price before he started buying into the company, that's a serious premium on the market price. And so a lot of shareholders would have been looking at that and saying, it's probably the best we're going to get. Let's take what's on offer.
I am curious at how you measure what underperformance is. There's nothing like Twitter. It is what it is. How do you compare that with Facebook? It's different people on Facebook. Old people like me with grey hair trying to find friends that we lost at school. Twitter is not that. So how do you decide whether Twitter could have been making more?
Well, they're both listed companies, and so the results are there for all the analysts and shareholders to see. And the amount of advertising revenue that Facebook was generating was in a number of magnitudes, multiples greater than Twitter, and had been for a long time. The number of daily active users was also way higher on Facebook. And so by all these key metrics, Twitter as an asset, Twitter as an investment had been underperforming. The fact that it was still it still had a share of the public narrative in terms of being that town square for the world. Absolutely, lots of celebrities, lots of leaders of governments around the world use it as a platform to cut through the noise and to create these direct relationships with their millions of followers. In that respect, it still performed quite well, but as a financial asset, it underperformed.
But Styli, Facebook is like family viewing, and Twitter that can be seriously R-rated, blood everywhere. And that's the nature of the beast. And as an advertiser, I'd rather play safe. So it's the nature of the beast that it is bloody, it is sometimes quite terrible. It's part of the fascination, but it's not great for advertising. And so again, I say, maybe that's as good as Twitter can be, given what it does.
Absolutely. Peter, you've touched on something. It has underperformed as an advertising destination. There are all those problems that you mentioned and others. And that's why some analysts and some critics were suggesting that a subscription model may have been better for Twitter. But that probably won't come around in maybe under Elon Musk's regime of Twitter. That may or may not come around. We don't know yet what kind of changes. But he has been punting the free speech card quite heavily in the build-up to this moment. And so, who knows where we're going to go with this in terms of the business model of Twitter.
What's your gut feeling of what happens next in this chapter?
It is really hard to say. It's hard to understand the motivations of Musk here beyond this big ego-driven play. These kinds of scenarios where rich and powerful people think they can take on these sometimes deeply philosophical issues that have far-reaching consequences to really understand the impact of free speech without responsibility and accountability on the platform. These are some of the biggest issues that have been around for a while. And, if he solves them, great. It is a tough ask, even of someone as brilliant, as a genius as Musk. But it's also dependent on his motivations. Are they ego-driven? Are they for the sake of humanity that he's getting involved in this? Or is this just another, vanity project where he thinks he can go out and, because he is someone who loves attention. We absolutely know that. He's no stranger to having his name out there. He loves that sort of direct relationship that he can have with his 80 million odd followers. So I'm not sure the motivations are coming from the most altruistic place.
I mean, this is quite a shift for him. I mean, he's a scientist. One can understand eco cars. One can understand sending up rockets that can land back on Earth. This is all pretty straightforward, and I would even say mathematical. But trying to play with a space where you've got to try and understand the psychology of human behavior, what we will put up with and what we won't. I mean, I certainly won't pay for Twitter, that's for sure. And that's probably already why he won't go that route. But this is quite a jump for him, isn't it?
It is. But as I said previously, this phenomenon of rich, powerful billionaires and the attraction to owning media assets or to being able to influence media assets is something that goes back, from the days of Hearst and Pulitzer in the American media markets. And so it's just, reimagined into a new form with social media now. And like I said, this could be a big ego play, or it could be a great business opportunity, with someone as geniusly mad as Elon Musk. Anything could happen.
All right, Styli, come on. Let's start our own social media platform and sell it for 44 billion in 10 years' time. Thanks so much indeed for joining us. Insights greatly appreciated. Thanks for your time.
Thank you, Peter.
Okay, that's Styli Charalambous, who's the CEO of Daily Maverick, trying to make sense of Elon Musk's move for Twitter. And it'll be interesting to see what he does with it, an underperforming asset as it's been described. But maybe he can turn things around there as he's done with cars and also rockets. Stay with us, you're watching The Globe.